Which conspiracy theory makes too much sense to be ignored? Story 1. Shout out to all the other Adelaideans out there. Adelaide once had a more comprehensive tram network than Melbourne. During the 1950s, however, it was torn up. The story goes that the premier at the time, Sir Thomas Playford, struck an agreement with General Motors, owners of the Australia car brand Holden, to dismantle the network in return for them establishing a manufacturing plant in the outer northern suburb of Elizabeth. While certainly the tram network increased congestion with the increase in vehicular traffic as car ownership expanded, it's not as crazy as it first sounds. General Motors were fined significant amounts in the United States, under antitrust laws, I believe, for buying up tramways and tearing them up to replace them with bus routes. General Motors producing buses and parts for buses, not trams. So it's not unreasonable they might ask the South Australian government, who owned the tram network, to do the same for the financial benefit of General Motors and Holden, not to mention the political and economic benefit to the South Australian government. Of course, the joke's on us at the end of the day. The General Motors Holden factory is finishing all operations by October this year. Meanwhile, the South Australian government is spending millions to rebuild the tram network that was dismantled all those years ago. Story 2. There was a whistleblower who reported on a city's police corruption. He filmed a van recording him in his house, and it seemed professional because they were using a thermo tracking camera. On Facebook, he posted, "If anything happens to me, it was them," or something to that extent. Days later, his house was burnt down and his corpse was found, and it was reported that he ended himself. Mysterious, huh? I'll post the link later. Story 3. The Taylor Swift-Tom Hiddleston relationship was faked for a surprise album release that got canceled after the Kim and Kanye feud. The initial photos, released of Tom and Taylor, came from a paparazzi source that had never existed before, and only ever distributed or sold photos of the two of them, and then disappeared after they broke it off. A theory I've seen very often is that Taylor's actually bi, which is why she has so many of these month-long relationships. There's this massive fan theory that she dated Diana Agron for not to 2 years, and then another one that she's been dating Carly Kloss since 2013. I thought it was kind of ridiculous at first, but when I read them, I'm almost certain that Taylor does prefer women. But for career reasons, especially since she made 4 country albums, she won't come out anytime soon anyway. Story 4. I worked at Skechers in college. They had music CDs sent in by corporate, and it was the only music you could play at the store, and you could only play the most recent CD they had sent. The names of the shoes were all random words: Caviar, Keepsakes, Vigor, Cascades, Bruiser. These are all current shoe names of theirs. I just found on their website, since I don't recall any of the ones from when I worked there. It was around 2009 to 2010, and the music CDs that we would get would always have songs that included the names of the shoes somewhere in them. It was never blatant, but almost always, if you listened closely, you could find a shoe name somewhere in the lyrics of the songs that played. One of the songs that was on every single CD they sent, "I Can't Wait" by New Shoes. I love that goddamn song too, by the way. All my fellow coworkers thought I was crazy when I would point this out to them. But to this day, I'm convinced that Skechers Corporate had some poor bastard combing through music each month to find appropriate pop songs that had the shoe names in the lyrics. To all the people saying variations on "This is obvious, duh, marketing 101, go look through the rest of the comments. There's no shortage of people who don't seem willing to believe that Skechers would actually do this, even on Reddit. So maybe it seems obvious to you, but a lot of average people aren't aware of how deep marketing can go. Story 5. Michael Jordan served a suspension on the down low from the NBA when he went to baseball. The suspension was for gambling. I have my own follow-up conspiracy theory that Jordan's image means so much to modern American athletic storylines and narratives that the big media companies would never look into a story like this to confirm its veracity, nor would they report on it in that case. Makes all the sense. He was a basketball player. During the 90s, the NBA wasn't even remotely close to what it was today. Suspending MJ may have been perceived at the time as a death sentence for the league. The same way if the NHL suspended Gretzky Everything is tainted. All the records. Their best player ever. The player who was the sport for everyone during that time frame. It's such a stroke of luck to have a best player in history playing in the present. Jordan was bigger than the sport back then. You can't even think of the impact. Millions of suburban white kids like me, we were all collecting his cards because they were going to be worth thousands of dollars. The NBA was finally getting headlines. The card industry was huge. We were all buying packs of cards thinking we were going to retire on them. Suspending Jordan back then, it's unthinkable, short of him murdering someone on video. And maybe even then, the NBA couldn't be faulted with attempting to cover it up. You had to be alive to understand how big he was back then. But if you're the commish, you can't let him slap you like that. You have to take action so he knows his place. You could not taint his legacy, but he had to know that you, the league, was in charge. They let it slide and slid, gave him warning after warning. He finally pushed the boundaries and forced them to suspend him. I 100% believe this one. Story 6. The Denver airport is actually a place for the president and other important people of society to go for a natural disaster, apocalyptic threat, nuclear attack threat, etc. The airport went double the budget, suggesting that there could be some possible underground stronghold of sorts. A few years ago, there was a threat of a meteor striking Earth, and Obama just happened to be in Denver. I've watched videos about it, and the airport itself features many horrific paintings and other disturbing artwork. Overall, it's just a very strange place. Story 7. The theory that nothing really that special goes on at the Groom Lake Air Force Base or Area 51. The whole aliens thing is pretty coincidental. Of course, the government doesn't want you knowing what they do. It is a secure base for secret testing. It's to protect secrets less from us and more from things like the USSR. The alien spacecraft seen around is just an experimental craft being tested. And of course, it's at night. Why would they want the spies to see it? The biggest thing is how the government declassifies things that come out of the base. The U-2 and the SR-71 came out of Area 51. It's no secret now. Where else do you test a supersonic spy plane? The government covers up lots of stuff, but Area 51 is no big deal. Story 8. The light bulb conspiracy. Most conspiracy theories don't make sense from an economic standpoint and involve way too many bad actors. Light bulb conspiracy suggests that manufacturers, along with their competitors, collude to reduce the life or quality of products to increase revenue from sales and maintenance. It all started with the light bulb. I don't see why manufacturers would not resort to this practice. Plus, we notice how our basic appliances last less longer. If technology is improving, they should last longer. Story 9. Michael Jackson's weird behavior and strange health problems can all be attributed to his being chemically castrated. His whole thing about being a kid? Yeah, he was literally a kid. He was chemically castrated to keep his voice high-pitched. This explains his lack of secondary gender characteristics, and wouldn't be all that strange considering all the other crap his father put him through to ensure the success of the Jackson 5. There have been multiple books written on this topic, and it seems very plausible to me. Except, I personally know an old musician, won't name drop, who claims that when he would call Michael Jackson on the phone, Michael would answer with that affected falsetto that he's known for. Then, when he realized who he was talking to, he code switched right over to sounding like an adult black man. I'm a rando on the internet, and I don't intend to give any proof of who told me that, but I consider him to be a reliable source on this. Michael Jackson was a weird dude, but the voice was just an effect. Story 10. FDR knew about the Pearl Harbor attack beforehand and allowed it to happen so he could justify U.S. involvement in World War II. Any attack on the USA by Japan would have resulted in war. If FDR knew, he could have warned the fleet and ordered that Pearl Harbor be properly defended, and nothing would have changed. In fact, that would have allowed the Pacific Fleet to roll out even more quickly, and therefore would have been prudent. Also, how could he have known? The administration suspected that Japan might betray them. So the Japanese ambassador was called in and asked about U.S. and Japan relations, and the ambassador lied and assured them that Japan was still interested in diplomatic talks. The radar in the Pacific at that time was rudimentary, and couldn't discern low-flying planes. The U.S. Pacific Fleet did not have patrols on that route at that time. There weren't a lot of vectors for info about the attack to make their way to FDR. Story 11. There is definitely much more to the assassination of President Kennedy than just one crazy lone wolf. Just the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald could defect to Russia, give up his American citizenship, stay there for 3 years, marry a Russian woman, then come back to the US and get back into the country without any problems at the height of the Cold War has never made sense to me. He was almost certainly on the payroll of the CIA. We also know he was seen with his later assassin, Jack Ruby, who had mob connections. Then there's the ridiculous magic bullet from the official Warren Commission report, so ridiculous that several members of the commission refused to sign on to it, which had to make some physics-defying turns and twists and hang still in the air at some point to be able to account for the way the commission said things went down. We also see President Kennedy go back and to the left on the Zapruder film, indicating that the gunshot came from the front. We know that dozens of witnesses testified that the gunshot came from the grassy knoll. In 1976, a special House committee was formed to investigate the assassination, and in 1979, they put out a report stating that the death of President Kennedy was most likely the result of a conspiracy. Story 12. Giants, and I don't mean over-the-top fantasy giants. A giant race between 9 to 12 feet tall with red hair. Many cultures from Native Americans, Irish, Near East cultures, Far East speak of a race of giants with red hair, and apparently many such bodies have been found of these people across North America and Europe, alongside hundreds of old newspaper articles reporting such bodies being found in large groups. I suppose if a 3-foot-tall hominid existed until 10 or so thousand years ago, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that a very large human species existed too. Story 13. I wouldn't be surprised if most of the wildly inappropriate things Trump said on the campaign trail were planned by a committee of analysts who knew he could win via appealing to the kind of people who actually want to hear those things. All of the people who were angry about the progressive direction this country was heading in identified with his bigoted language. It was a calculated risk. They combined any press is good press with targeting that demographic, and it paid off. All of this would fit in with the idea that Trump has wanted to run for president forever. He has said so in multiple TV interviews over the decades, and just needed to pick the right, volatile time. Just a theory. Story 14. I want to clarify that I'm not religious whatsoever, but this has always bugged me. The satanic and occult crap going on with the elites, musicians, politics, etc. Once you start digging, it's hard not to notice it, even if you don't believe in it. One of my sisters, who's pretty religious, was going on about it years ago. I don't believe any of that crap, so I just blew it off. It wasn't until I started researching Aleister Crowley that made me realize she wasn't just being crazy. I started seeing satanic and occult symbolism everywhere. Movies, music videos, award ceremonies, etc. Jay-Z, Tyler the Creator, Jonas Bros all wearing Crowley t-shirts. Beyoncé wearing Baphomet rings and saying she has an alternate personality while she's on stage. The all-seeing eye, which is everywhere. Famous people hanging out with people like Marina Abramovich, who's a totally satanic nut job. Then, when the Pizzagate crap came out, I did the same thing. I called crap until I started remembering the satanic crap I looked into a while back. I realize how dumb the Pizzagate thing sounds, so I usually don't bring the topic up. But I think it's directly related to satanic crap, especially when you see the interviews of the children that escaped satanic cults. Anyway, I looked into it a lot and could go on forever. So I'll just shut up unless someone responds. Story 15. The Lockerbie bombing was actually the work of Syrian terrorists paid for by Iran. Nothing to do with Libya at all. This was covered up and Iran was never publicly blamed because it would be immediately obvious to all that it was a revenge attack for the USS Vincennes incident 6 months earlier. We also wanted to have Iran somewhat on side because we were diametrically opposed to Hussein's Iraq. The bombing was designed to have maximum propaganda value for those in the know. Libya had no motive, and no credible Libyan intelligence sources have claimed Libyan responsibility, even after the fall of the Gaddafi regime. Even the Gaddafi children have said it was part of a power game and a deal struck by their late father, and that no Libyan was actually responsible. Abdelbaset al-Megrahi was handed over as a scapegoat and punishment because he was one of the colonel's best friends and fell out of favor. Story 16. Cigarettes in movies are sponsored by cigarette manufacturers to encourage smoking. I saw one movie that specifically said they did not accept money from cigarette manufacturers, which implies that it is common. Watch how some movies and TV shows linger on cigarette smoking even when it is irrelevant to the story. Product placement in movies is very common, and famously De Beers promoted diamonds in movies as the only stone to use on an engagement ring. More recently, hundreds of products have paid product placement or provide free products or cars, etc. Cigarette advertising is restricted in most countries, but cigarette companies still give marketing money to spend. Movies and TV shows are a better way for them to normalize the behavior of smoking. There is an increase in smoking among the young who are a big target for these. It seems like more people smoke in movies than you see smoking day to day. Miraculously, few of them have smoker's cough or lung disease. Story 17. That the MI5 and Prince Philip ended Diana conspiracy theory was invented by the press to cover up their actual involvement in her death. Mohammed Al-Fayed latched onto the conspiracy theory because he was a grief-stricken father looking for answers. The truth was, if the paparazzi weren't chasing Diana, they wouldn't have crashed. The driver wasn't drunk enough to be speeding for no reason. Even if he was, the fact two paparazzi photographers obstructed emergency services, stopping them from getting to Diana in time to save her life, played a massive part in her death. The major British tabloids have a lot of power in the UK, so they made up the Diana conspiracy to protect their profits, knowing if they did get blamed for the accident, that the public backlash would end a lot of careers. Story 18. I don't know if there's an official name to this theory, but the collective mind theory. The theory that everyone is connected at a deep subconscious level. There's tons of evidence to support this, the biggest piece being specific tools. Different civilizations developed completely independent of each other, but are nearly exactly alike. Think about the wheel, the bow and arrow, systems of government, religions, even certain repeating language patterns, as well as cases of people knowing things they shouldn't know, whether that be someone coming out of a coma fluent in a language they've never heard before, or claims to precognition. Twins are also very good evidence for this, since they theorize the connection between twins is thinner, so that they are able to tap into it easier and more directly. Story 19. The one that stuck with me and still makes me wonder is HAARP. Not the mind control BS, but the part about weather control. The design is very similar to a theoretical weather control device created by Tesla, where he theorized that a powerful enough signal could heat the atmosphere and create artificial high-pressure pockets to very loosely direct the weather. HARP was a DARPA project in cooperation with the Air Force and the Navy. Now, that doesn't have to mean anything. A lot of great non-military projects are funded and run by the military. But it increases the chances that they were looking for something with military application they set out. It was shut down and turned over to a university for research a few years ago, and it's highly unlikely that there is any applicable truth to the conspiracy now. But I still think it very likely that the place was built with the hopes of some kind of weather machine, even though it doesn't seem to have worked out for that. After all, the government did declassify records about trying to form rain clouds in Vietnam over enemy supply lines, though that project proved largely unsuccessful as well. We know they were interested in pursuing that line of research. Story 20. The fact that the U.S. still fluoridates its public water. Fluoride is a byproduct of fertilizer production. Why get rid of it if you can sell to the government? The most obvious misconception on the matter is that fluoride is beneficial to your teeth upon ingestion. The best analogy to explain the whole here is eating chapstick for smoother lips. It won't do anything positive for you. Like fluoride, it is only effective when used topically. Here's where it gets spicy. At Auschwitz, medical experiments were carried out on the prisoners, including the testing of different chemicals. Fluoride is one of them. The results from these German studies found that fluoride made subjects less resistant to authority. Docile. The Nobel Prize winning idea of fluoridating water on a large scale may have extremely harmful and life changing impact. Why does the US continue this? Story 21. Tesla didn't die in his apartment while going senile and talking to pigeons and producing nothing of scientific interest in his later years. He was a part of what came to be known as the Philadelphia experiment, which was an attempt to teleport ships at sea long distances. He died in the experiment because it did more than just teleport from A to B, more or less as described in the film by the same name, and his remains were subsequently cremated. His lab and home were cleaned out by John Trump, an electrical engineer, physicist, inventor, and Donald Trump's uncle. John Trump reported that there was nothing of note, but in fact, he discovered research relating to the experiment, which led to the development of time travel technology. John Trump passed this technology down to his nephew, Donald Trump, who used it to build an empire and subtly change details of things which would otherwise have cost him the election, leading to a win. Story 22. I won't go into all the facts, just a couple small bits. All of it would require a novel, maybe. Martin Bryant was not the only triggerman at the Port Arthur massacre. A witness confirmed that the weapon was held in the shooter's right hand, and the shooter in the Broad Arrow Cafe fired from his right hip at an average range of 12 feet, shooting 12 moving and partially obscured targets at the rate of 1 every 1.25 seconds, using no gun sights in scope, ending most of his victims with a single shot to the head. Only 29 rounds were used to end or injure a total of 32 people on that day. This is accuracy and speed equivalent to the very, very best top 1% of counter-terrorist marksmen. Martin Bryant has been labeled by respected professionals as having the intellectual capacity of an 8-year-old child, FFS. Martin Bryant always fired his Webley Osprey air rifle from the left shoulder because he is and always has been a left-handed shooter. Ever wondered why Martin Bryant has never been to trial? Story 23. The video game. The Last of Us was released with the likeness of the actress Ellen Page being used in the game as one of the main characters, Ellie. The company Naughty Dog said they didn't use her likeness, they just made a person. They also sound very similar. I don't know if she sued them or just publicly blasted them, don't remember. Fast forward to February 14th, 2014. The first single-player DLC of The Last of Us is released titled Left Behind. In this DLC, you find out how she was infected with her friend who died. You also find out that Ellie is a lesbian when she kisses her friend in the heat of the moment and declares her love. That same night, Ellen Page nationally came out as being gay. No way, this can just be a coincidence. Story 24. The Aurora program or project. The idea that the SR-71 was retired simply because it was in fact replaced by a faster, stealthier spy plane. Now, the fact that it's codenamed Aurora has been disproved because that budgetary code was for the B-2 stealth bomber. But the fact remains the military has never been keen on outright surrendering a capability. Now, satellites have replaced a lot of general defense surveillance. For our fellow superpowers, are predictable and easier to deceive, while also being limited in terms of response time for urgent intelligence needs. It makes sense, right? It isn't exactly a stretch of the imagination, and anyone that claims to have a blurry picture of an unidentified airplane is going to be dismissed as fabricated, just like sightings of the F-117 and F-22 were in Nevada.